Hello everyone and welcome. I'm very pleased that you are with me today. My name is Evelina Fibik and I'm a machine learning scientist at DITA and I'm also working on my PhD in the field of non-parametric statistics at the Technical University in Berlin. I have prepared today's talk in cooperation with my colleague Fabian Kringel, who is also a mathematician and a data scientist at DITA. Those of you who participated in our first webinar will certainly already know our company, but I also assume that there are some new people here today who may not have participated in the first webinar, and especially for you I would like to start by saying a few words about DITA. So on this slide you can see some of my colleagues. We are a very experienced and well-coordinated team of machine learning scientists working on several projects, and we are mainly specialized in two areas. The first one is machine vision and the other is natural language processing, in short NLP, which will also be our topic today. In the area of machine vision, we deal with problems such as semantic segmentation, object recognition or classification. So in other words, in this area we make the computer understand what can be seen in an image and then use this information accordingly. And in the field of NLP, which is of course our topic today, we work a lot with natural language data, which are simply very text-heavy documents such as contracts, letters or invoices. And our task in this area is to extract certain information such as order number or delivery dates from this kind of documents. If you would like to know more about us, I would like to invite you to visit our homepage. I have listed the relevant links for you on this slide, where we report very regularly about our projects and our experiences. As I just mentioned, our topic today is NLP, and we have prepared 3 webinars on this topic for you. The first of them already took place at the end of April, and the topic was text recognition, which is actually the first step that you very often have to take in order to make an NLP task feasible at all. Today we will look at the topic of labeling tools. The use of these tools is particularly important when it comes to creating training and test data sets. So it is a very important topic in the area of NLP as well. And in our third webinar in June, we will talk about entity recognition in documents. In this webinar, we will show how we have just used text recognition and labeling tools to extract information from invoices. So let us now turn to our today's talk. In order to motivate the topic of labeling tools in the first place and to introduce it step by step, I have divided this presentation into smaller chapters, and I will first talk briefly about what labeling means and why it is necessary. Then I will talk about what can be labeled and what challenges we often face when choosing a tool. I will also give some tips on what is important to consider when choosing a tool, and then I will present 2 selected tools with which we have had quite good experiences in our projects. So again, back to the question, what does labeling mean? If you actually take a sober look just at the definition, then you will find, for example, a description that it is a task to read a certain document and to add additional information in the form of the so-called annotations or labels. And this could look like in this picture, for example. Here you see some lines of text, and in these lines certain information is marked. This means, for example, mentions of persons, organizations or places, and between these labels there are defined the so-called relations, which indicate that a person is located in a specific place or that 2 names are equivalent names for the same organization. Labeling is also possible and is done in the area of machine vision. And there the images are annotated by marking certain regions, that means some pixels within these images, and providing them with the required information. And this could look like this, for example. So here on this slide you can see a labeled satellite image of Lagos. That was one of our projects in which we were concerned with observing development of built-up areas, and for this purpose we marked such areas in satellite images. These are the red pixels that you can see in the image. The other pixels denote the undeveloped areas. So it was a kind of binary decision, built up versus undeveloped. So at the end of the day, if you look at this example or at the previous example, I mean this one here, you can say, well, labeling seems to be quite simple and actually not particularly exciting. So why is it good for, and why should we care about it? In this way, we come to the second question, and this is why labeling is necessary at all. To answer this question, I will briefly refer to 2 slides from our first webinar. We said there that in the NLP field, the data are very often simply documents that are very text-heavy. Perhaps they contain also structures such as tables, but generally they often contain a lot of text, like you can see here on the slide. And our goal is to extract information from these documents by applying corresponding machine learning algorithms to this data. And we have also said that applying machine learning models to such data can be seen as a third step of an NLP project. However, in order for this third step to be possible at all, it is very often the case that first we have to go through step 1 and 2, which means first processing the data with OCR tools, because the data are very often only available in the form of scanned images, which do not contain any text information, and the text must be first extracted from them. And in the second step, it is necessary to use labeling tools in order to create training and test data sets. And at this point, of course, you can ask yourself why we need training data sets or test data sets at all if the text is already there. So why we can't, for example, apply a model directly to it. This question is actually answered quite quickly if we take a closer look at the term machine learning, because the word learning is not in this term just by chance. In fact, it is that machine learning algorithms are simply statistical procedures, or in other words, statistical models that learn from the data. And this means that the model must first see a large number of examples of certain objects in order to learn to recognize these objects on the basis of these examples. And of course, it depends on how many examples there are and how good these examples are. So in any case, the better and the more examples are seen, the greater is the learning effect, and also the better is the performance of the algorithm. To visualize this briefly, let us assume that we are interested, for example, in identifying mentions of people in documents. So it could be that our input data are documents that are very text-heavy, like we see in this example here. So the labeling task in this case would mean that we first mark all mentions of people in these documents, and we would do that in order to first provide the algorithm with enough examples to show what it means that a series of letters simply denotes a person. And of course, we would do that in the hope or with the aim that when a new sentence comes along that the algorithm has never seen before, it will still be able to identify these mentions of people in this sentence in the correct way. And for this very reason, it is very important to think about exactly what we want to label and how we want to do it, so that the model also learns the right thing and recognizes the right thing in the end. Therefore, it is definitely worth taking a look at what can be labeled at all. So one possibility is, for example, to label letters, words, or word sequences, which would be a typical task in the field of information extraction. So you could imagine, for example, an invoice from which you would like to extract information such as an invoice address, product name, order quantity, perhaps also invoice number, date, or any other information from this document. And to realize this task, you would first need to create a corresponding training data set just by labeling in your data the information you're interested in. We will look at such an example in our third webinar, where we will talk about how we have used OCR and labeling tools in order to extract information from invoices. Another possibility are phrases and sentences. And I would like to give one of our projects as an example here. This is a project that I actually already told you about in the first webinar. But in order that we are all on the same page and know what it is about, I will briefly introduce it here again. I will show some results and I will briefly talk about how we implemented it. So here the situation was that it was about an online tenant protection club, and this club offered its clients a legal review of rental contracts by experienced partner lawyers. And the process was that the client could scan or also photograph the contract and submit it online to the club. Then the contract was sent to the lawyer, evaluated by him, and then the relevant question was answered. And it turned out over time that a lot of questions concerned actually the validity of the so-called cosmetic repair clauses, which oblige the tenant to carry out regular renovations. And the interesting thing is that such clauses are often formulated incorrectly and are therefore also invalid. So, of course, knowing whether such a clause is valid or not can save a lot of time and money. The problem, however, was that since every contract is different, there was no general answer that would hold for each contract. So still, the contracts had to be read and evaluated separately, which was of course associated with high costs and time expenditure. Therefore, my colleagues came up with a solution to automate this process by simply using software to search each contract for the presence of relevant clauses and then assess the validity of these clauses. And for this, I would like to show you a short video demo in which you will see how a contract is scanned and searched, and then the evaluation is carried out. So here you can see a contract right now. This contract is read in, then the relevant clauses are found in this contract, and the effectiveness of the final renovation clause is assessed first. At the end, also a proposal for an answer is made, which can still be adopted accordingly before sending it to the customer. To implement this task, we used the following labeling scheme. We took the contracts and simply marked certain parts of the text in them, as we can see here on this slide. We needed, of course, some advice from lawyers on this, and we have also looked at different options what to label. But it turned out that just marking of certain text passages works best or makes the most sense in this case. And the different classes that we identified in this situation were just the different clauses in the documents. Another possibility which can be labeled are whole documents. And an example for this would be a sentiment analysis in which a document is read. Then in the next step it has to be decided whether the opinion expressed in this document is a positive opinion or rather a negative one. And finally, a corresponding label is assigned to this document. One more example on this would be something like a spam filter, in which we read an email and decide whether it is a spam or not. So as we can see, there are different possibilities what can be labeled, and as soon as we actually know what we want to label, we also need to have an appropriate tool for this task. And at that point we come to the challenges when choosing the tool. Actually, the first challenge is the large number of different tools. And I would like to visualize this with a graphic. Here you can see an overview over 10 years of how many tools are published each year. And in this graph we can see, for example, that in 2018 there were 7 tools, in 2019 2 tools, which means that several tools are made available each year. And that is a very good news on the one hand, because of course you have a very large choice. But on the other hand, it is difficult to choose the most suitable tool out of this large quantity. We also found out that it's difficult to find a list of tools together with the disadvantages and advantages or descriptions for which problems these tools are best suited. Therefore, the most common selection method is that you just have to try out these tools yourself, get an overview of the usage and functionalities, which is often connected with a loss of time. Another thing is that not all tools are very well documented, or the installation times are sometimes a bit longer, and that of course means again a time factor. Not all tools support functionalities such as the configuration of individual labeling schemes, which for us, for example, was very important in the project with rental contracts, so that we could design the scheme in a very flexible way, especially with respect to what we want to label and which relations can be defined between the labels. And another point is that not all tools support functionalities such as collaborative labeling, which is when several people work on a project and label at the same time. This is of course a very important factor, especially when several people are involved in the project due to a large amount of the data, which should be labeled as quickly as possible, and the quality of labeling should be high. Therefore, one can actually say that the choice of a tool plays a very important role in the sense that its completeness or user-friendliness can significantly speed up or slow down the process of labeling. Therefore, here are a few tips from our point of view on what you should consider in advance when choosing a tool. One thing is definitely the task itself. That means what is the goal of the project? What do we want to label? What information should be extracted in the first place? The second point is the data and the data availability, because we know that the more data is available, the better, because the better we can train and validate our model. However, here we also have to take into account that there may be some documents, some data that do not contain any textual information, and if this is the case, such data first have to be processed with text recognition tools. Another point is the possibility to create an individual labeling scheme. For us, for example, this feature was extremely important as we worked on the project with rental agreements, which I presented before. In this case, we also asked experts for some help, just because we are, of course, not lawyers ourselves, and this help of experts was really crucial to understand the contracts, to better understand how the scheme should be structured, and in order that the algorithm learns just the right thing. And another example where we also asked experts for help was a situation in the field of machine vision. as we worked on a project where we had to identify illegal mines in images. These were satellite images of Suriname. And during this project, we worked very intensively with the University of Applied Sciences in Aachen, just in order to gain expert knowledge and to better understand the problem and know what is actually important while searching for this kind of objects in images. Therefore, from our point of view, labeling scheme is a factor that should definitely be taken into account. And then there are the labeling guidelines. So, especially when several people are involved in one project, it makes a lot of sense to simply write down the rules on how and what is labeled and why, so that all the people involved in the labeling also have the same knowledge and can work equally well in terms of quality. And quite simply for the reason that the expert knowledge, for example, does not get lost. And the task itself, the labeling. As we have seen, if we already know what we are labeling and how, then the task itself is perhaps not very difficult, but definitely very time consuming, and that should be also taken into account. And the last factor is, of course, the tool itself. So we have found that it is really important that the tool is very well available and documented, so that it is also easy to use. And the installation. Of course, it would be nice if it were easy to install, and the use, where you should consider how this tool can be used. That means, is it possible to use it only as a cloud service or maybe also on premises locally, so that, for example, the data does not leave the local instance? And there are also other functionalities to consider, some of which we have already mentioned, such as the creation of a labeling scheme or just the user friendliness. And just as a summary, I would say that these are the factors that, from our perspective, play a very important role while labeling, and therefore should be considered when choosing the tool. So, having said this all, I would like to introduce now two tools with which we have already some experiences in our projects. One tool is the Bread Rapid annotation tool, and the other one is TechTalk. And here in this table, you can find some general information on both of them. In our opinion, both tools are very well documented and easy to install. For both, there's either a demo version or a free version to try out. Bread runs as a local server and is used via browser. And TechTalk can be used locally or as a cloud service. Bread is a free tool, and for TechTalk there is a possibility to get a free version, which has, however, limited functionality in the sense that it does not allow to annotate PDF documents that contain text information, which is possible when using the full version of this tool. Both tools support collaborative labeling, and the labeling schemes can be defined very individually, although there are, of course, also some differences in how these tools work in this context, but I will briefly discuss this later on. Another point is that with Bread, you can actually only edit text files, so the input data must be in this format. And the annotations are also stored in the form of text files. On the contrary, as I already also mentioned before, the full version of TechTalk offers a bit more functionality here, so that you can annotate searchable PDF files directly, which means that using OCR can be omitted in this case, and this is of course a great advantage. And now I will present a short video demo for both tools, in which I will demonstrate how these tools work and how they are used. When it comes to Bread Rapid, this tool is used in the browser, preferably via Chrome. It runs as a local server and accordingly is started in the command line. Then an address is generated, which has to be entered in the browser, and when it has been done, then the program opens and can be used. So here, for example, we see in this demo that the documents are structured in so-called collections, and each collection contains the corresponding documents which can be annotated after clicking on them. But first we have to log in into the program using our username and password. In general, here you can see a partially annotated document with some labels. There is a label person, organization, or place, and simply by marking the corresponding word, a window appears in which the defined labels are available and can be chosen. You can also change the labels very easily if they have been assigned incorrectly. So the labeling with this tool is very simple and flexible. This tool also offers the possibility to define some relations. So here we see an example where the university is located in the city of Munich, and this is a relation that goes in one direction and it can be defined and displayed very well. Another example is a relation that goes in both directions, and in this case it is about equivalent descriptions of the same organization, for example. There are also other possibilities to mark relations or even so-called events. They are automatically created by clicking on the labels. However, such events or relations are of course defined in advance by determining between labels they may remain. And I think we can stop this video for now because I would also like to show you some more details about the definition of the labels themselves. The tool supports collaborative labeling, and all users and passwords are stored in a configuration file, which is also located in the folder where the documents to be labeled are stored. In addition, the labeling scheme, that is the labels itself, are defined in an annotation file. This file looks, for example, like this. It corresponds to the example we just saw on the video, and it actually consists of 4 sections. These are the entities, relations, events, and attributes. And in the first part, you simply define the labels that you want to use later in the project. Then you can also define the relations by assigning the name and defining between which labels this relation should exist. You can also define some events, for example. So as before, this is just a simple text file that is also stored in the folder in which the files to be labeled are located. You can also make some further adjustments. For example, you can define the color scheme for the labels, or determine how the relations between the labels should be displayed. This is done in a file called visual. Here we can see an example of such file. It has basically 2 sections, labels and drawings. In the first part, the labels are simply listed, and in the second part, the corresponding colors for the labels and the line types for the relations are defined. The annotations created are saved in a text-based standoff format of BRAT. This is a file with an extension ANN, and it looks like this, for example. In this document we looked at before, we see that a label person has the value Luisa, and it starts with the first letter, ends after the 5th letter, and has an ID T1. So this is the way how the labels are stored. When it comes to TechTalk, what is valuable to see from our point of view here is that TechTalk allows the annotation of searchable PDF files, and the way it works and how it is operated is a little bit different here. We will see that in the video in a moment. TechTalk can also be used in a browser. You can upload the text files as well as PDF files into the project. So here we see how it happens. What is very nice about this tool is that all help files are also directly integrated, so that if any questions arise, you can always see how to proceed. And after reading in the documents, they are also immediately visible and listed. And here we see a PDF file, which is shown just as it is, and the annotation can also take place directly in this file. In the preview on the right hand side, you can also see the labels that have been assigned. The same applies to the values that these labels have. Actually, for each kind of label, we see in the preview which labels have been defined and what values they have. Under settings, it is also possible to define further labels. This is done very simply by defining the name of the labels and the corresponding colors. And as soon as these labels are defined, they can be also used in the project. We will see here that the new labels can be used immediately. And the nice thing is that we have always have the preview of which labels have already been defined, and that any changes to the labels can be made very easily. Also, with regard to relations, they are also very easily defined by simply specifying the labels between which the relation should exist. This we will see in a moment. And here we just define a relation that an organization is located in that and that country. So a relation between organization and country. And as soon as this relation is defined, it can be assigned by simply clicking on two labels, as we can see right now. And then it is, of course, also visible in the preview on the right hand side. So, as you have seen, the tools do work a bit differently. However, I would say it is hard to say if one tool is better than the other. They are just different, and they are probably meant for different use cases. Here again is a short summary of TechTalk. Actually, all that we have also seen in the video, therefore I will skip this slide now. And if we look at a general comparison, I would say that both of these tools are very intuitive to use. With both, we have the possibility to select the labels very directly. Both support collaborative labeling, so that several people can be involved in the labeling, and labeling schemes can also be created in a very flexible way. The advantage of TechTalk over BREAD is that it also allows direct annotation of PDFs, of course, if these PDFs contain the text information. When using BREAD, all documents must be available in the form of text files, and also the formatting is lost when reading in the documents. And when it comes to configuration, I would personally say that TechTalk is maybe a little easier to use or configure precisely, because many settings are done directly in the browser, in the project. Besides, one could perhaps say that BREAD is more time-consuming, because one has to define the additional configuration files. However, this is the matter of taste. Other tools that are also worth mentioning from our point of view are, for example, Ducano. Here I also have to say that we don't have any project experience with this tool. We actually came across this tool during the research for this webinar and then simply tried out and also prepared a video presentation for you. Therefore, if you're interested, you're very welcome to take a look on this video. However, to sum up this tool, I would say that it is very suitable if you have a simple project and want to start quickly with the annotation instead of spending a lot of time with configuration. Besides, it is very well documented and very easy to use. And the second tool we believe is worth mentioning is Labelbox. We have used this tool very often in the field of machine vision for the annotation of images. And as far as I know, there's no available version of this tool for NLP yet. It is still being working on. However, the experience we have made with this tool in the field of machine vision led us believe that as soon as a version for NLP is available, it will definitely make sense to have a closer look at this tool. And that brings us to the end of this presentation. On this slide, I have collected some additional information for you on the topic of NLP and labeling tools. And you will find the presentation slides for this talk on our homepage. I thank you very much for your attention, and I hope to meet you again in our third webinar.